Hey, Chris Lee, Joey Dwyer here at Bridgestone Arena. Talking about the apparent news of the day, reports that Jerry Stackhouse is being dismissed. We have been trying to, their own set of confirmations. I'll just start by saying I got a text about an hour and a half ago. This would have been, well, closer to 2 hours now. Probably 10:15 this morning, maybe 10:30, saying from a good source who's been right on things. It looks like they're making a coaching change in so many words. The national media has picked up on it. I've texted with some national sources. We're not reporting this to be fact yet, but a lot of stuff in the water this morning. My guess is they're just working out the particulars. But it appears Vanderbilt will have a coaching change. Joey Dwyer, your reaction?
Going to be a really interesting couple months, and I think this was the move Vanderbilt needed to make, and if it is the move they're going to make, I think obviously says some things about their program. This was a buyout that was thought to be really large, and Vanderbilt paid it, and I think with the culture that was instilled in that program and obviously the results, like Stack mentioned last night, there wasn't really a world in which you could bring him back and justify it. It felt like this was the move that had to be made for this program to get back on track, and it was made. There was just so much wrong. They didn't have a 2025 guy on campus, I think, the whole season. The NIL was supposed to be the fix, but they had NIL last offseason, and that didn't fix anything. So results are results at some point, and I think Jerry Stackhouse kind of figured that out towards the end and figured out that it was it for him. But I think you hate it for Stack, but it had to be done.
Yeah, I've been checking on it since December. The answer has been consistent. Everything that I heard pointed to retention. I think the staff thought it was being retained. That stuff was not out there by accident. I'll just put it that, I guess. But the interesting thing is there's been talk about the buyout being problematic. I've thought that for a while. I've said it on our board. I think I've said it on the podcast. The national media is now picking up on this. It appears to be true. Matt Norlander said he thought it was maybe north of $15 million, which is a number that I had heard about a month ago. There were some estimates of as much as maybe $25 or $26 million, depending on how the contract was worded, and depending on whether he's working off a new contract, which I think might have been the case. There might have been a new contract written after last season, which would have been a colossal mistake, but apparently, and we don't know this officially, just to be very transparent, we've reached out to Vanderbilt for comment. We don't expect to get one, but that's what you do in your job when you're trying to track down, all right, what is fact, what is rumor. So that's kind of where we are as we're doing this. We don't have confirmation as we speak, but the common sense has told you for a while that you need to get out of this and move on if you can. The fan support, the season ticket support, the booster support would have eroded to whatever level underneath bad would be. And that's always a place where if you're going to find a path moving forward, you find it, figure it out.
Yeah, I think if they would have kept Stackhouse, they would have been standing on an island almost by themselves, fighting up current against just about everybody. That's not what you want to do, especially in this age of college athletics, Chris. It feels like you have to have boosters behind you. You have to have players and former players behind you. And Stackhouse didn't seem to have that. It felt like he was on an island on his own. Every time he talked, Twitter would blow up and was angry about something he said. That can't be the case. And doing that again next season and doing what they did this season with, again, what's going to be a huge roster turnover, what would have been a huge roster turnover with Stackhouse, definition of insanity. Now Vanderbilt has to find a new direction. It has to find something to hang its hat on as a program. Right now, it doesn't have a whole lot. Jerry Stackhouse and his staff seem to dig in a real hole. This was supposed to be the year that they took a step forward, and I feel like they're as far off as ever from being a competitive SEC team. And you saw it this season. They were lucky to win 4 games, and it felt like there was a celebration from the program that they did win 4 games. That can never be the case. The standard has lowered so much for this program over the years. Again, can't be the case. It has to get better at some point. It feels like Vanderbilt, there was some path to Jerry Stackhouse making that work, but it's a much easier path now that you have a fresh direction, you have a fresh voice, and maybe you have some people bought in now.
Yeah, and I don't think it was an empty island. There were a few boosters that would have been with them. I think there was a couple NIL people. I think I can't get into detail. I think I have an idea how there was a path to something of an NIL budget, but I think there's also been a groundswell of donors and some big ones and some season ticket holders for sure saying, hey, look, if you do this, we're out. And that's never a spot where you want to be, where you are as a school choosing between. And look, if there's a school that'll do it, it's the one we cover. They tend to care more about other things and pleasing people internally and all those things than they do the fan base. But everything always reaches a breaking point. Like I've said, you just never knew where it was. And it feels like we were there last night. And again, my theory last night is that was a trial balloon to see, fans said, hey, we can get on board with Jerry Stackhouse. And he's contrite and there's a path forward and we're willing to give him another chance. I think if the public had seen that, I cannot prove this by any stretch, but after I slept on, I thought that seemed to me like either a guy who was resigned, unless everybody said, hey, we're willing to give this another ride, we're willing to give it an all those things, then is there a workable path forward? And then when you're talking a buyout that is 8 figures, which we all believe it is, that's the reason why they would try it. But I don't think it was going to work under any circumstance. It didn't, and here we are, 12:09 Thursday afternoon.
You just couldn't justify it, Chris. And it felt like as you went more and more throughout the season, this thing was doomed. And even if they brought it back, it was going to be incredibly difficult for them to find a path. I know the idea of an NIL backing to rework the roster was floated, but their talent evaluation just as a whole wasn't something that inspired me. You look at last year in the portal, they put all their chips in Tyron Lawrence basket, and he under-delivered. 11 of the 19 high school recruits that he got before the 2022 class transferred. 4 of the 6 multi-year transfers went back into the portal. The 2 that didn't were Ezra Monyo and Liam Robbins.
Yeah.
It tells you about what's going on there. You hear from so many former players stories about, well, Stackhouse said this to me, and we had this type of relationship, or we didn't have a relationship at all. It just can't happen, Chris. That's not how you lead a program forward. And I really wish that people got to see the side of Stackhouse they saw last night more often.
Yeah.
But I think there were some things that got in the way of that. I think a lot of his players never saw him that way.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge issue. I think there's just some things that never got fixed. You talked about last night that in the first week or 2 of his tenure, you were hearing things that were red flags in your mind. Those things never really seemed to change. Now, some things did, but even going back to the simplest thing, the non-conference, they never fixed it.
We were at media day. What did he say? We're going to, pardon my language, beat the hell out of everybody. Those were his words. And the first thing that happened is they lost a game to Presbyterian that had a 19-game losing streak and was picked at the bottom of the Big South, which is not exactly a Power 5 league. And so, I mean, I think honestly, from opening night on, it was going nowhere, and that's where it went.
It was doomed, Chris. And every time you stepped in that gym, it felt like a shell of itself. Yeah. And especially from opening night, that whole day was about as eerie as you could have imagined. Tyron Lawrence was seen in a booth that morning after Stack told us he was going to play a few days before, and then that happened that night. They got down by 14 or 15 at one point. From there, you could say, well, we got to wait to see what this team is with injuries, with the injured guys back. The feeling in there was unexplainable, Chris.
Yeah.
I've never felt Memorial Gym like that, and I felt it again at the BC game after the Lee Dort incident, but the feel around this program this season was incredibly poor.
Yeah.
And I think it's so hard to bounce back from that. If it was a team that went 9-23 and it felt like there was a direction to it, it felt like the players were backing the coach, and some players did. Ezra Monyo, I think, was a big advocate for him, and I don't think that was an act. I think Ezra truly did enjoy him, but I know of 10 other players that didn't, and a lot of those guys are impactful guys. It's a benevolent dictatorship, Chris, and a lot of guys didn't feel the benevolence. And when he made that comment, a lot of guys felt like that was the reality. Yeah. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a jab at anything. It was reality of the program. And you can't overcome that type of feel.
There's a saying, if ifs and buts were candy and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas. And I feel like they tried to scenario that to death. And I feel like that happened a lot in recent weeks with this guy just needs NIL. Jerry and I are close to the same age. And I'll just tell you something. I sat down with him. I was doing the Vanderbilt preview for Blue Ribbon College Basketball, and I sit down in the building over there when he first got the job. And he told me, just flat out off the record, hey, we're not going to be out there recruiting as much as everybody else. We're going to put our attention more to player development. And thought, well, that's with the time that you can do player development is capped. It's not like you have this amount of time and you have to make a choice between recruiting and you have to make a choice between, because there are NCAA rules around that. I just thought, it's not going to work. And it never did. It never changed. Like I said, he and I are about the same age. And I don't like opera music. I'm not going to suddenly start liking it tomorrow. The things that you like and don't like, some things change as you get older, but mostly they don't. He didn't like recruiting. He didn't like putting the effort into it. I was told he would tell kids, hey, you're not going to hear from us as much as you will from other coaching staffs. I don't, and part of me goes, okay, I don't like having to kiss tail, but I've worked in the recruiting industry and other things, and that's just part of the job. You got to show up and show people you care and that they're wanted. When you don't do that, it sends another message. And as somebody who's really well connected in basketball, and they said, what's going to happen is other staffs are going to go out there and they're going to say, well, if you're not hearing from Vanderbilt, that must mean they don't want you. And that's your reality. And that's really why it never worked.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to look at their troubles recruiting, look at their 2024 class. They had 3 stars.
Yeah.
I think those guys are good players, but that had to be the year that they took a step forward. And I know of a guy who was told by someone else who was seriously considering Vanderbilt, was a 4-star guy, was told, you don't want to go there. And I think that word got around. There was a lot of bad PR around this program.
Yeah.
And a lot of guys who could have been there didn't go there because of those things, but also because of effort.
And let me just interrupt you. I mean, who knows? There's rumor, there's a lot of stuff that's just, you just never know. It's one person's word, a lot of people, but the results were always right in front of us.
Absolutely.
And it never really changed.
Yeah, and a lot of things about this program didn't change, Chris. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. Like, look at they had more talent at the beginning of his tenure than they did at the end. And at the beginning of it, they went 0-18.
Yeah.
Before they ended with less talent on their roster, and that's a result of the turnover.
Yeah.
Like we've mentioned a whole lot, but there's so much crap that went on in that program. Look at senior day.
Yeah.
You can't win like that. You have to be able to have people behind you, buying in. There's just so many things that I can pinpoint and say, if they would have done that differently, they would have been an incredibly successful program. And they had such a high ceiling with Stackhouse, probably higher than a lot of other coaches would have given them. But the simple things, the things, we talked about this over and over again, the things that make you a good college basketball coach, Stackhouse didn't seem to have a feel for it.
Yeah.
Never really got it. It was never just a simple thing, like talking blue ribbon. Rarely ever happens.
Yeah, I couldn't get him to do it.
Every other coach in the country would talk to blue ribbon.
Well, there's a couple that don't, but they're bigger fish than he.
Yeah, it's just, again, like, there's not much availability in the off season. And this isn't an airing of media grievances. This is just kind of a microcosm of what it was. Like, other coaches did things that staff didn't. And when you run off guys like, I'm not going to name names, but guys on your staff who do a great job and you don't listen to them.
Yeah.
And I don't know that he fully didn't listen to him to an extent, but that was the impression some of them had. It's hard to keep him.
They lost one of them in the off season because he got fed up with it, and he was their biggest, allegedly their advanced scouting guy who was really good at it. You know, when there was talk of, well, Stack's teams are great, and the coach, a lot of that was Adam Mazzari. Mm-hmm. And when he left, I just thought, oh boy.
Yeah. Let's reflect on the tenure as a whole, Chris. 70-91 overall, 28-60 in league play. Had a really unbelievable run last year where it felt like for a period of time the magic was back. They couldn't lose to anybody. That magic didn't last though, and that's what Jerry Stackhouse's tenure was. It was a magic that didn't last. They had Scottie Pippen Jr. They made a push, but it felt like it was going to come up short the year before. Last year again came up short because they didn't seem to understand what they needed to do as a conference player. At least neglected it. Never felt like there was enough sense of urgency there. And then this year felt like the last offseason they were too lenient. They kind of got ahead of themselves a little bit, thinking they had more than they had, and they crashed and burned on them, Chris.
Yeah. By the way, thank you to sponsors Anchor Impact, Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, Wash House, Sutherland and Belt, and Maynard Nexon Government Contracts Group. We do not have our ad reads in front of us. We are in the hallway of Bridgestone Arena, where I need to be out watching the tournament that's going on through a couple of walls behind me. You can hear crowd noise. So, any parting thoughts or more things to go over?
I think Billy and I are going to talk a little bit too. I don't know where he's at. I thought he was with us, but he couldn't hear us, right?
He couldn't earlier. Billy, if you're there, chime in.
I'm here.
There he
is.
There he is.
You guys got me?
Billy, you want to keep it going?
Yeah. Look, Chris, I think you're right about Vanderbilt not making Vanderbilt decisions, normal Vanderbilt decisions that we've seen, whether it's Malcolm Turner, David Williams. I mean, it's been around Vanderbilt for so long that Vanderbilt makes Vanderbilt decisions. Yeah. This wasn't look, this was normal. This was logical. But this decision combined with who they hire, again, we don't know who they're going to hire, but this decision combined with hiring a new coach, this isn't usually what Vanderbilt does, especially considering, say they hire a guy like a Chris Mack or a guy like a Bucky McMillan, where you look at it and you go, wow, Vanderbilt, we're not used to Vanderbilt doing this. That's what keeps hitting me. And I think they have a golden opportunity to do that. And overall, this is a big day in Vanderbilt athletics, not just basketball.
Potentially.
Potentially, yes. And again, nothing's official yet. They could make an announcement tomorrow. They could today. Who knows? But everything points to this happening. I just continue to harp back to, if this does happen and it is official, then you took a turn in the right direction in changing the perception of Vanderbilt and Vanderbilt basketball. And I think that's kind of where they're at.
Bill, I need to cut you off because I'm going to need my phone. Joey and I are seeing the text messages that are coming across. Shameless teaser for the Vandy Sports message board as we drop things on there between podcasts and things. There's some things that I need to follow up on, and they require me using my phone, which we're using to do this. So Joey's about to hop on with his phone, and I'm going to go so I can run some things down. But last thing I'll say, they can't afford to same old Vandy this, and God help them if they do.
All right, that is Chris and Joey. We'll wait to get Joey back in here through his phone, but Joey, and I think we've got him. Man, you guys covered a lot of it. I think what I'll get to as I switch it over to me is, the whole idea that, Jerry Stackhouse was going to find a way to make this work out with some NIL money. I don't think either of us buy that. But does it change now that the perception is that they are making a change? And how much confidence, I guess, do you have in – it depends on who they hire, of course, but how much confidence do you have that a different coach can come in and sort of take control of Vanderbilt's NIL efforts in basketball?
I mean, Clark Lee did it, so I have a ton of confidence that a new guy can do it. If it's a guy who gets people excited like Chris Mack or Bucky McMillan, feels like there's certainly a path to them having boosters lining up, trying to pay for whatever they need to pay for. It feels like there's a lot of momentum that could be built in the next few weeks behind a candidate. And if they can get the right guy, they have a chance to do something that Vanderbilt basketball hasn't done in a good bit. I'm not saying they're going to be a Final Four team, but they haven't been to the tournament in forever, Chris. Or Billy.
Yeah. Still used to talking to Chris.
Yeah.
No, you're right, Joey. And it's been 7 years, and they had to do this. This absolutely had to happen. And again, it's not official yet. We'll see when it is. But are you ready to potentially start talking candidates here?
Can we talk more about the stack tenure a little bit?
Yeah.
We'll talk about candidates in a sec. There's some good lists that have been put out. But I think you just look at this and nothing ever changed. And that's really what it boils down to for me, is that nothing ever changed. Like they said they were gonna beat the hell out of everybody in the preseason, and then he walked it back the next week. That was a microcosm of what this tenure was. The recruiting efforts, it was way better in 2022, and then 2023 took another step back. And then you look at the rotation, 2022, Jordan Wright and Liam Robbins sat on the bench for the first half of the year. And then the year after, the same thing happens with Jason Rivera-Torres late in the year. So much went wrong with the Jerry Stackhouse tenure, and there's so much potential. And I think about last night as potential for how he could have endeared himself to the fan base. Jerry Stackhouse is not an evil guy or anything of the sort, but nobody got to see that side of him. And I think that was another mistake. There was a ton of mistakes made, but it just goes back to the benevolent dictatorship thing for me, to where people just didn't feel like that was the best program for them and that was the best place they needed to be. And you saw that every offseason. They pushed guys out. It wasn't a warm and fuzzy environment by any stretch of the imagination. And it's hard to keep guys and it's hard to win that way. And even if they had won next season, like you kind of mentioned, I think they would have taken another step back just because there was so much wrong. And I don't think they had the staff to continually have a great roster year by year.
Yeah, look, there's so much that has happened, and you've seen a lot of it. You saw a lot of it last year up close and personal. And I like how you mentioned earlier with Chris the idea that there was so much crap. There was so many stories that were tossed around of, hey, this guy didn't feel like he was treated the way he wanted to be treated. And even though he might have wanted to stay in the program and help this program win, not naming names, but this era could have gone differently. I think we all know that and believe that. And I think last night basically cemented that for me because Stackhouse understood the areas that he failed. At least I think for the most part. The high school recruiting aspect of it. You had so many other areas, like the connection between him and the fan base that was non-existent. And I think he is almost laying a blueprint to the next coach in a weird way, to say, hey, here's how you can win at Vanderbilt, because he has learned how you can't win at Vanderbilt. And I think that's kind of an interesting aspect of last night's presser. And again, nothing's official yet, but Joey, this could be, like I said earlier, this could be the start of Vanderbilt athletics changing the perception even more. We saw it with the facility upgrades with football and even basketball. You're getting a brand new basketball building. This could be the start of something huge. And I just think the Stackhouse era had to end. And I think there was a feeling in the air that, look, recruiting wasn't going well. There were no I don't even know when the last visit was this year. I don't think the staff looked at it and said, man, this isn't the best season to have visits. I think that you can understand that. But at the end of the day, this season happened and you had to make a move. You just had to.
Absolutely. There was no other path here. And I'll bite your bone to say, and we'll go into candidates. Matt Norlander tweeted early candidates on the list: Kyle Smith from Washington State, Mitch Henderson from Princeton, a guy I think is a slept-on guy, although the production hasn't really been there. It feels like he has the blueprint. Chris Mack, a guy that's come up a lot, and Josh Schertz, a guy I got to talk to when they played Belmont. Early favorite for the St. Louis job, but I think if Vandy came calling, he would hold off on that. Billy, what is your reaction to kind of those guys? And interesting that Bucky McMillan's not on that list as well.
Yeah, interesting. I think these guys are pretty well connected. Chris Mack has got to be high up. I've seen his name mentioned a ton, from different people, whether it's, different Twitter accounts that we do feel confident in. But to me, Joey, I do look at a guy like a Bucky McMillan as somebody that could come in and quickly ignite the fan base and make that connection. You have to have a coach that will make that connection with the fans. So Bucky McMillan, Josh Schertz, we've talked about. I don't know that we talked about a ton, but I do think he's a guy. He's a proven winner at Indiana State. There's so much. We've even heard outside type of guys like Shaka Smart from VCU, and I know there's a connection within Vanderbilt to Shaka Smart. And to me, the buyout is interesting. Well north of $15 million. I think that means that they are committed to making the hire that will completely change the trajectory of this program. And so for me, Chris Mack would be that kind of guy. Bucky McMillan would be exactly. Bucky McMillan would be that kind of guy. Maybe not home run nationally, but I think regionally and locally, Bucky McMillan would be celebrated. I feel like I'm missing a big piece here. Pat Kelsey from Charleston. We've talked a ton about him. I think both of us are going to get pieces out there on candidates, but to me, Joey, it's Chris Mack, Bucky McMillan, Josh Schertz, Pat Kelsey. Those four. There are some outside candidates, but we did get a comment here, Will Wade, from somebody on YouTube. Don't think that's happening, but I think those four guys to me, Joey, are guys that stand out.
Yeah, I'll go into what I think a candidate needs more, and you can chime in as well, because we'll talk plenty about what their candidates are going to be. Billy, I think the number one thing that their candidate may need is just to get the fan base back, because the fan base is completely checked out of this program right now. They're completely gone. They don't care. The amount of apathy we had seen this season was unbelievable. They also need this comes up with a lot with Bucky McMillan, which is like why people like him so much, a sleep in the office type guy. A lot of people are sick of what the stories were with Jerry Stackhouse. They need a guy who relates to his players, need a guy who is willing to do what other guys aren't willing to do. And that's what the Vanderbilt job is all about. You have to do more with less. And they might not have to do it anymore. I think it's a way more appealing job than it has been in the past, and Chris has alluded to that. The names we've heard that are interested in this job, I won't divulge fully into that. We'll probably get to that soon. But the names that are interested in this job are way better than I would have anticipated in the past. Not Bruce Pearl, but it feels like this job is a lot more desirable than it has been in the past because of the practice facility, because of the supposed NIL backing. This job means something now, and it's not Vandy football. It's not an impossible job. It's probably not going to be turned next year, but if you can get the right guy who can get the fan base behind him, if you can get a guy who can kind of use the portal to a better extent than Stackhouse did, and to a better extent than some guys did, you're going to have to nail evals. But there's a chance to really turn this thing. It just depends on who they get and whether they get a guy who's capable of it. Billy, what are you really looking for with the next Vandy basketball head coach? What do you want to see out of them? What are your boxes to check?
I think number one, a guy that can bring energy, a guy that's smart, and a guy that can relate to the fans and bring the fans back, because I think that's the number one, the biggest thing. Number two, a guy, like you said, sleep in the gym, sleepless nights, a guy that just grinds, recruits his butt off. I think that is another huge piece Vanderbilt has to have, because in this Stackhouse era, they failed miserably. They only graduated 2 high school recruits that they got to campus in 5 years. Like that's not good enough. So you have to recruit. You absolutely have to. So fan base, bringing them back, and they want to come back. They're starving. So that's number one. Number two, recruit. It's still, recruiting is still important in today's day and age of college basketball. You have to recruit. And number three, Joey, a guy that's a little bit different. A guy, because you're Vanderbilt, right? Shea Ralph, that was a great hire. She has proven that she has found a way to build Vanderbilt fairly quickly, and Candace Lee made that hire. I don't know how different Shea Ralph is from other coaches, but I mean, she has her own style. You can't go, hey, let's. Yeah, she gets it. Clark Lee, same type. Tim Corbin's been here for a while, but that mold just think about Tim Corbin, Clark Lee, and Shea Ralph. I mean, think about. I think Candace Lee can continue her string of good hires. I mean, Clark Lee, it's still up in the air whether that was a confirmed good hire, but everything points to Clark Lee this season turning it around. So that's number one. Shea Ralph, phenomenal hire. Candace Lee has a chance to go 3 for 3 here. And so I just think, and yeah, we got a good comment here from Robert. Recruit, develop, and retain. Stackhouse didn't really recruit. I don't know that he wanted to recruit. He developed at a decent clip. Jordan Wright, Tyron Lawrence, but nothing crazy. And retain. No one was retained, Joe. I mean, that's the thing. That to me is the biggest part. Player retention, but you got to get them to campus first too. So recruiting number one. And let's retain some players here. I mean, culture. There was never a culture under Stackhouse. And so, Joey, I think that right there is those three things: recruit, develop, retain, fan base connection. We've talked about it. I think those are some really important things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the blueprint: recruit, develop, retain. And Vanderbilt did one of those things, and sometimes didn't even do that one thing. I think Jason Torres could have been developed a whole lot better this season, but Vanderbilt can't do what everybody else does. It can't be Ole Miss and completely flip the roster in the portal every single season. We know that. We know the restrictions. Stack has talked about that in the past, and I think a lot of people kind of scoffed at it because it came at poor times. He was making excuses when he shouldn't have been making excuses. But Vanderbilt has to do it a different way than others do. It's not impossible. It's actually far from impossible. They have the new facility. They have NIL money. Got to hit on some recruits, though. And Vanderbilt hasn't done that at a super high level in the past. But if they can get a guy that guys want to come play for, and he doesn't have to run the best stuff in the world, but he has to be a program builder. And it feels like Vanderbilt kind of had the opposite of that. They ran so many sets, and I think it was an interesting case study. I don't know that guys wanted to play in that offense as much as you would think based on hearing other SEC coaches talk. Guys want to play in an offense where they're going to be free. And Tyron Lawrence and Ezra Monyeau were free, but there were so many sets. They called it set dang near every play. They had 250 of them in their playbook. That's probably why they were so bad early in the season a lot of the time, was not only sense of urgency, but because their schemes were so complex. You don't have to be the best X's and O's coach in the world. I think Bucky McMillan's scheme is a little exotic, but there's a reason that people want to hire him, because all the intangibles are there. He's at the forefront of NIL. He knows what he wants out of his program. He knows what he wants his program to appear like. That's what Vanderbilt has to have. It has to have a guy who's able to market it, a guy who's able to embrace the job, embrace what Vanderbilt's about rather than complaining about it. And I'm not saying that Stack complained about it that often, although he did sometimes. You got to have a guy who knows this job in and out, knows what he's getting into, and embraces it. Embraces what Vanderbilt's about. Embrace the academics. Embrace the city. Embrace what this job is and take it for that. Don't think it's something else. And there's a chance to make it something special. And I don't know what special looks like for this program, but it's certainly not where it is right now. I think this is a real uphill climb for this guy. There's a lot of guys who are going to go in the portal now, guys who would have gone in the portal anyway, probably. But it's going to be a tough rebuild, Billy. It's going to take a few years, but there's potential for this to be something.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I want to ask you, Joey, we talked about the cupboard being bare, and we will probably wrap up here shortly because we've got some other stuff to do. But how bare is the cupboard? And I know you weren't here when Stackhouse got here, but I know you've done your research and you've looked into that a little bit. Stackhouse came into a lot better situation than this next coach is going to come into. Would you agree?
Yeah, at least from a player personnel standpoint. Maybe the facilities are better. Maybe the NIL is better. NIL wasn't really even a thing when Stack, well, I guess it was a thing, but he was very by the book. And that's one thing I'll give him credit for. Stack never really, I mean, he used NIL, but he was never kind of a guy who would do things behind. He was always clean, and I'll always give him credit for that. But they've got a worse player personnel side than they've had in a long time, especially if they lose a guy like Tyron Lawrence and Ben Allen-Lube. And I think for the first order of business for the next coach, find a way to keep those guys at Memorial Gym next year.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think JQ Roberts potentially. We'll see about Malik Presley, Rivera Torres. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's some truth to what Stack was saying with the young guys, but there's not enough. The cupboard, I would say, is pretty bare and is going to be fairly bare. That's why you've got to get moving here. I mean, if you're Vanderbilt, Chris said last night, thought the move would have been earlier to potentially jump on a guy, but you almost think, do they have somebody in mind? Do they have a guy in their back pocket? They're just kind of waiting to finalize. Who knows? Who knows anything with these coaching searches, Joey? But at the end of the day, I'll say this is a potentially big day, huge day for Vanderbilt fans, for the department, for the basketball program. Again, we don't have any insight on who they could hire. We have guys that we think the fans would like and would be good fits, but we know as much as just about as much as fans in certain areas, right? I mean, these searches are so fluid that it's just hard to keep up sometimes. I'll say this at the end of the day, Joey, and then we'll have to wrap it up. As soon as this is made official, like I said, this could really signify a momentous. We might be looking back at this 4 or 5 years in advance, saying, "Man, today was important because they made the change, they made the switch." But it's not going to be easy for this next guy, and that's going to be important to keep in mind as well. And Vanderbilt's department, is there a bad perception there? Can you win at Vanderbilt? That's going to be a question that some of these coaches ask themselves when they interview. So there's still so much we can react to. I'm sure we'll be having podcasts here soon. But Joey, I'll let you kind of wrap it up with maybe some parting thoughts you've got.
Yeah, this is a huge opportunity for them, and it's a shame it didn't work out with Stackhouse yet, or a shame it didn't work out with Jerry Stackhouse, because the basketball acumen was as high as any Vanderbilt basketball coach has had. I think just hearing him talk about the game was an interesting experience, and you learn something just about every time. But it didn't work for a multitude of reasons that we've discussed the whole time. It's going to be an uphill climb for this program, but it feels like if they can make the right hire and inject some life into it, they have a chance to really do some things that they haven't done in a few years. And that first step is making the NCAA tournament. They've got to get back there at some point. Otherwise, I don't know where you go with this athletic department. It was going to be a huge gamble on Candace Lee's part if she had kept Stackhouse. Now it's a huge gamble to see whether she can make the right hire. She's going to have to nail this one to really cement herself. I don't know what her job security fully is, but it feels like this is a huge hire for her and maybe the most important one she's made. For Jerry Stackhouse, again, a shame it didn't work out. I wish the fans got to see the side of him that they saw more last night. I think he did a lot for me early in my career, and I'll always be appreciative of that. But there were just so many missteps, and I was harsh on him throughout a lot of it. But I think a lot of it, you couldn't avoid talking about some of the things that happened in that program, and it's a shame it ended the way it did.
It is. And, at the end of the day, last night was sad. I mean, it was sad for Ezra Mignon. It was sad for, the program, the school. I think there was a feeling that it was the end of an era, but we didn't know for sure. But it ended up being true. It's not totally official. That's the way we're talking as if it is. And we'll see. We'll see, Joey. Of course, you are there at the SEC tournament. Vanderbilt has already been eliminated, but we'll be watching some basketball here the next few days. We'll probably be podcasting here the next few days as well. I'm sure we'll try to get a big one in, maybe with Luke as well, and get some reaction. There will be reaction locally, regionally, maybe nationally to this, and we'll see. But again, we'll get some more long form stuff in here. But that's Joey Dwyer. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Love the comments, love the questions. I'll let Joey get back to watching hoops, and we'll see what happens here. We'll see when anything is made official. But that's Joey Dwyer. I'm Billy Derrick. Thanks for coming on to another Vandy Sports Podcast.